Page 19, Chapter 4. When the bell rang after this class, Luke didn't even try to go against the crowd. This time the flow of traffic carried him to a huge room with tables instead of desks, and bookshelves instead of portraits on the wall. All the other boys sat down and pulled out books and paper and pens or pencils. Homework. They were doing homework. Luke felt brilliant for figuring that out. How many times had he watched his older brothers groan over math problems, stumble over reading assignments, scratch out answers in history workbooks? Matthew and Mark did not like school. Once, years ago, Luke had been peering over Mark's shoulder at his homework and noticed an easy mistake. "Isn't 8 times 4 32? He'd innocently asked. "You wrote down 34. Mark stuck out his tongue and pushed so hard on his pencil that the lead broke. "See what you made me do," he complained. "If you're so smart, why don't you go to school for me?" Mother was hovering over them. "Hush," she said to Mark, and that had been the end of it. Luke's family didn't dwell on what they all knew. Because Luke was the third born, he was illegal, violating the population law with every breath he took and every bite of food he ate. Of course he couldn't go to school or anywhere else. But here he was, now at school. And it wasn't Matthew or Mark's little country school, but a grand, fancy place that only the richest people, barons, could afford. Rich people like the real Lee Grant, who had died in a skiing accident. His family had concealed his death and secretly given his identity card to help a shadow child come out of hiding. Couldn't everyone tell that Luke was an imposter? Luke wished the real Lee Grant were still alive. He wished that he, himself, were still at home hiding. "Young man," someone said in a warning voice. Luke glanced around. He was the only one still standing. Quickly, he slipped into the nearest vacant chair. He didn't have any books to study or work to do. Maybe this was the time to read the note from Jenstad. But as he reached into his pocket, he knew it wasn't safe. The boy across the table from him kept looking up. The boy 2 chairs down kept whispering and pointing. Though Luke kept his head down, he could feel eyes all around him. Even if no one was looking directly at him, Luke felt itchy and anxious just being in the same room with so many other people. He couldn't read the note. He could barely keep himself from bolting out of his chair, running out the door, finding some closet or small space to hide in. And then everybody would know that he wasn't really Lee Grant. Everybody would know that all he knew was how to hide. Luke forced himself to sit still for 2 hours. When a bell went off again, everyone trooped down a hall to a huge dining area. Luke hadn't eaten since breakfast at home, his mother's lightest biscuits, and, as a miraculous farewell treat, fresh eggs. Luke could remember the pride shining in her eyes as she had slid the plate in front of him. "From the factory?" he had asked. Eggs usually were not available for ordinary people, but his mother worked at a chicken factory, and if her supervisors were in a good mood, sometimes she got extra food. Mother had nodded. "I promised them 40 hours of overtime in exchange, unpaid." Luke had gulped. "Just for 2 eggs for me?" Mother had looked at him. "It was a good trade," she'd said. Remembering breakfast gave him a lump in his throat as big as an egg. He wasn't hungry. But he sat down because all the other boys were sitting. Instantly, another boy turned on him and glared. "Seniors only," he said. "Huh?" Luke asked. "Only seniors are allowed at this table," the boy said, in the same kind of mocking voice that Mark always used with Luke when Luke had said something dumb. "Oh," Luke said. "What are you? Some kind of a lecker?" another boy asked. Luke didn't know how to answer that. He was so eager to get up, he tripped and crashed into the next table. "Juniors only," a boy said there. Luke tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it had grown even bigger. He went from table to table, not even bothering to try to sit down. At each table, someone said in a bored voice, "Sophomores only," or "Freshmen only," or "Eights only." Luke didn't know what he was, so he kept moving. Finally, he reached an empty table and sat down. A bowl of leaves and what looked like germinating soybeans sat in front of him. Was this supposed to be his food? The other boys were eating it, so he did too. The leaves were clammy and bitter and stuck in his throat. Luke let himself think about potato chips. Nobody was supposed to have junk food because of the food shortages that led to the population law, But Jen had given him potato chips when he'd gone over to her house secretly at great risk. He could still taste the salt, could still feel the crisp chips against the roof of his mouth, could still hear Jen saying, when he protested that potato chips were illegal, "Yeah, well, we're illegal too, so why don't we enjoy ourselves?" Jen. If Jen were here now, she wouldn't put up with bitter leaves and tasteless bean sprouts for supper. She'd be standing up, demanding decent food. She'd go to any table she wanted. She'd march up to the person in charge, the headmaster, and say, "Why won't anyone tell me what classes to go to? What are demerits? What are the rules anyway? You're not running this school very well." She'd punch Raleigh right in the eye. But Jen wasn't there. Jen was dead. Luke bent his head low over his food. He stopped even pretending to chew and swallow. After supper, everyone was herded into another vast room. A man stood at the front talking about how glorious the government was, about how their leader's wisdom had kept them all from starving. Lies, Luke thought, and marveled that he had the will even to think that. Finally, another bell rang, and the other boys scattered. Luke walked uncertainly up and down strange halls. "To your room," a man warned him. "Lights out in 10 minutes." Luke was so eager to get to his room, he actually found his voice. I'm new. I don't know where my room is." "Well then, find out." "How?" Luke asked. The man sighed and rolled his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked slowly, as though Luke might be too stupid to understand the question. Somehow Luke couldn't bring himself to claim his fake identity. "I know my room number, 156. I just don't remember where it is." "Why didn't you say so?" the man growled. "Up those stairs and around the corner." Even with the man's directions, Luke got turned around and had to search and search. By the time he finally saw the engraved 156, his legs were trembling with exhaustion and his feet were blistered from walking in the stiff, unfamiliar shoes. Luke was used to going barefoot. He was used to sitting in the house all day, not walking up and down stairs and through labyrinth-like halls. He stepped through the doorway and headed straight for his bed. It had a spread on it and looked like all the others now. All Luke wanted to do was fall into it and go to sleep and forget everything that had happened that day. "Did you ask permission?" someone barked at him. Luke looked around. He was so tired he hadn't even noticed that 7 boys were sitting on the floor in a circle playing some sort of card game. Permission? He asked. One of the boys, probably the one who'd spoken, threw back his head and laughed. He was tall and thin and older than Luke, maybe even as old as Luke's brother, Matthew, who was 15. But Matthew was familiar, known. Luke couldn't read this boy's expression. He had a strange cast to his dark eyes, and his face was oddly shaped. Something about him reminded Luke of the pictures he'd seen in books of jackals. "Hey," the boy said, "they sent us a voice replicator. Amazingly human-like form. Voice is a little off, though. Let's try another one. Repeat after me. I am an Exnay. I am a Fonroll. I am a Lecker. I don't deserve to live." Most of the other boys were laughing now, too, but quietly, as if they didn't want to miss Luke's answer. Luke hesitated. He'd heard those words before. Raleigh had called him an Exnay and a Fonroll, and someone had called him a Lecker at dinner. Maybe they were from that foreign language the short, fat teacher had been speaking. Luke had no idea what the words meant, but he could tell that they were probably bad things. Thanks to Matthew and Mark, he could spot a setup. Luke shook his head. The jackal boy sighed in exaggerated disappointment. "Broken already," he said. He stood up and knocked his fist against Luke's side the way Luke had seen his father tap on the engine of broken tractors or trucks. "You just can't get good junk nowadays." Luke pulled away. He stepped toward his bed. Jackal Boy laughed again. "Oh no, not so fast. Permission, remember? Say, 'I am your servant, O mighty master. I shall do your bidding forever. I will not eat or sleep or breathe unless you say it is to be so.'" The boy moved between Luke and his bed. The others leaned forward menacingly, like a pack of jackals, Luke thought. Jackals were nasty, vicious animals. Luke had read a book about them. They tore their prey limb from limb sometimes. These were really boys, not jackals, Luke reminded himself, but he was too tired to fight. "I am your servant," he mumbled. I don't remember the rest." Why do they always send us the stupid ones? The jackal boy asked. He looked down at Luke. Bet you don't even know your own name. Lee, Luke whispered, looking down at his shoes. Lee, repeat after me. I, am. The jackal boy fed him each word, and Luke, hating himself, repeated it. Then the boy made him touch his elbow to his nose, cross his eyes, stand on one foot while reciting, I am the lowest of the low, everyone should spit on me 5 times. The lights flickered and went out in the middle of this ordeal, and still the jackal boy continued. Finally, he yawned. Luke could hear his jaw crack in the dark. New boy, you bore me, he said. Remove yourself from my presence. Huh? Luke said. Go to bed. Meekly, Luke slipped beneath his covers. He was still wearing his clothes, even his shoes, but he didn't dare get back up to take them off. The unfamiliar pants bunched up around his waist, and he silently smoothed them out. Touching his pocket reminded him he still hadn't read the note from Jen's dad. Tomorrow, Luke thought. He felt a little bit of hope return. Tomorrow, he would read the note, and then he would know how to find out what classes to go to, how to deal with boys like Raleigh and his roommates, how to get by. No, not just to get by. Luke remembered what he'd hoped for leaving home. Was it only that morning? It seemed so long ago. He'd been thinking about making a difference in the world, finding some way to help other third children who had to hide. Luke didn't expect the note from Jen's dad to tell him how to do that, but it would give him a start. It would make that possible. All he had to do was go to sleep, and then it would be tomorrow, and he could read the note. But Luke couldn't sleep. The room was filled with unfamiliar sounds. First, the other boys whispering, then breathing deeply in sleep. The beds creaking, when someone turned over. Some vent somewhere blowing air on them all. Luke ached, missing his room at home, his family, Jen. And his own name. He felt his lips draw together. Luke, he whispered soundlessly in the dark. My name is Luke. He waited silently, his heart pounding, but nothing happened. No alarm bells went off, no population police swooped in to carry him away. His feeling of hope surged, even more than the fear. His name was Luke. He was nobody's servant. He was not the lowest of the low. He was Dad and Mother's son. He was Matthew and Mark's brother. He was Jen's friend. Or he had been. Chapter 5. Luke didn't get a chance to read the note from Jen's dad the next day, or the next, or the next. In fact, an entire week went by with him resolving every night in bed, tomorrow, surely I'll find a way to read the note tomorrow. But the next nightfall found him still stymied. At first, he thought there was an easy solution. The bathroom, for example. He could go in, shut the door, read the note. But none of the bathrooms at Hendrix were like the bathroom at home, closed in and private. The Hendrix bathrooms were rows of urinals and commodes right out in front of everyone. Even the shower was communal, just an open, tiled room with dozens of spigots sprouting from each wall. Luke could barely bring himself to lower his pants with everyone watching, let alone read the note. He always lingered until most of the other boys were gone, but he never found a bathroom that fully emptied out. Finally, after 3 days had passed and he was getting desperate, he resolved to wait in the bathroom for as long as it took, regardless of bells or classes. The bell rang for breakfast, and still he remained, pretending to be very concerned with scrubbing his face. Finally, it was just Luke and another boy, standing by the door. Out, the boy said. The boy was mean-faced and muscular. Luke's legs trembled, but he didn't shut off the water. I'm not done, Luke mumbled, trying to sound nonchalant, unconcerned. He failed miserably. The boy grabbed Luke's arm. Didn't you hear me? I said out. The boy jerked so hard on Luke's arm that Luke felt pain shoot through his whole body. Then the boy shoved Luke out the door. Luke landed in a heap on the hallway floor. A hall monitor looked down at him in disgust. You're late for breakfast, he said. 2 demerits. Luke feebly looked from the hall monitor to the other boy who was now standing menacingly in the bathroom doorway. Then he understood. They were alike. There were guards in all the bathrooms, as well as in all the halls. He couldn't read the note in either place. He wondered about trying to read the note in his room. He would get there first at bedtime, he decided. The first several days, this was impossible because no matter how hard he tried, he could never remember which way to go. Left at the top of the stairs, then right, then right, then left? Or was it right, then left, then right? Most nights, it was a miracle if he found the room at all before lights out. Though that was just as well because it reduced the amount of time that Jackal Boy could spend tormenting him. Finally, in the middle of Luke's second week at Hendrix, he sat at the back of the hall during the evening lecture, so he was the first one up the stairs. Holding his breath, he counted off the turns. Right, yes, left. And there, yes, room 156. Luke rushed in past the hall monitor. He slipped behind the door, out of sight, and jammed his hand in his pocket, and heard, "So my servant's reporting for duty early tonight, eh?" It was Jackal Boy, lounging on his bed. Luke had to bite his lip to keep from screaming. That night, Jackal Boy was crueler than ever. Luke had to repeat, "I am a fawn roll," 50 times. He had to hop up and down on one foot for 5 minutes. He had to do 100 push-ups. He'd never seen anyone do a push-up before. All the other boys howled with laughter when he stammeringly confessed, I don't know how. He had to push a marble across the floor with his nose. Lying in bed that night, Luke despaired. His shoulders ached from the push-ups. His side was still bruised from being thrown out of the bathroom. I'll never get to read the note, he thought. I'll never be alone. It wasn't just that he wanted to read the note. It was maddening to always be around other people, to know that his every action might be observed, to never have a second of privacy. How could he long to be alone and feel so lonely all at once? Chapter 6. Luke got by. It wasn't really that hard as long as he didn't let himself want anything. As long as he didn't linger in the bathroom or halls, as long as he sat down promptly when he entered a classroom, as long as he didn't try to eat at the wrong table, nobody bothered him except Jackal Boy. And Jackal Boy's torture was bearable, even at its worst. The problem was, Luke couldn't always stop himself from wanting more. He wanted home, and he wanted his family, and he wanted Jen alive again, and he wanted all the third children to be free so he didn't have to go around pretending to be someone else anymore. Those were impossible dreams, little fantasies that he played with in his mind in the middle of the night when he couldn't sleep. The glow of those fantasies always made reality seem even bleaker the next morning, but everything else he wanted seemed impossible too. He wanted to be able to climb into bed each night without even looking at Jackal Boy, without saying, "I am the dumbest lecker alive" 100 times, without doing a single push-up, pull-up, sit-up, or toe touch. Once during a nightly session, he dared to mumble, "Leave me alone," to Jackal Boy. But when Luke looked up, Jackal Boy was laughing hysterically. Did you say what I thought you said?" He sputtered between laughs. "Leave me alone? Oh, that's a good one, you stupid fawn roll. You going to make me? Go ahead, make me." Jackal Boy had his fists up, a taunting grin smeared across his face. Behind him, their other roommates gathered, eager for a fight. Eager, it seemed, to help Jackal Boy pound every shred of courage out of Luke. Luke sized up the height and weight difference just between him and Jackal Boy. Never mind the rest of the boys. Nobody had to swing a single punch. Luke's courage was already gone. At least Jackal Boy tortured Luke only once a day. 3 times a day in the cavernous dining hall, Luke longed for food that tasted good. Mouthing bitter greens and mealy bread, he dreamed of Mother's stews, her biscuits, her apple pies. He could remember the exact sound of her voice asking him, "Want to lick the bowl?" whenever she made a cake, and then the taste of sweet batter. He could remember every detail of the one time that he and Jen had made cookies together. They'd used special chips made of chocolate, and when the cookies were done and hot from the oven, the chips were melted and sweet on his tongue. He and Jen sat in the kitchen laughing and talking and eating cookie after cookie after cookie. That was one of the best visits he'd ever had with Jen. It was also one of the last. He tried to forget that, but he couldn't. He knew that if he sat down in the Hendrix dining hall and someone put a whole plate full of the Jen cookies in front of him, they'd taste every bit as bitter as the greens. He wouldn't be able to eat a bite. And Mother's biscuits, flown in fresh, if that were possible, would crumble in his mouth just like the mealy bread. Nothing could taste good when you ate alone in the midst of hundreds of boys who didn't even know your name, who didn't care. For Luke wanted a friend at Hendrix too. Sometimes he forced himself to stop daydreaming and start paying attention to the other boys. He wasn't brave enough to speak to any of them, but he thought if he listened, then someday he couldn't tell the boys apart. Maybe it had something to do with being in hiding all those years. He wasn't blind. He could tell that some of them had different colored hair, even slightly different colored skin. Some were taller, some were shorter, some were fatter, some were thinner. Some of them were older even than Luke's brothers. Others were a few years younger than Luke himself. But Luke could never fix any of them in his mind. Even Jackal Boy was unrecognizable outside of their room. Once he came up to Luke and said, "Ah, my servant, just when I need a pin. Give me yours, kid." And Luke stared, open-mouthed, for so long that Jackal Boy just eased the pin out of Luke's hand and headed off, muttering, "Fine time to turn statue on me." Another time during breakfast, he overheard boys joking at a nearby table. "Oh, come on, Spence," one boy said to another. Luke stared. "Spence," he repeated to himself, memorizing the boy's features. That boy's name is Spence. Now I know who he is. It gave him a warm glow all morning to think that he'd be able to recognize somebody now. At lunch, he watched Spence slip into his seat. Luke practically smiled. Then Spence knocked over his water glass, dousing the boy beside him. "Ted, you lecker," the other boy exclaimed. "Ted?" But at dinner, the boy Luke would have sworn was Spence looked up when someone called out, "Hey, EJ." "Not now." Spence, Ted, EJ said irritably. Or was he simply EJ and Spence and Ted were totally different boys? Luke gave up trying to keep track of anybody's names. He thought he noticed other boys responding to multiple names too, but he could never be sure. Why was he so easily confused? It was like the halls of the school, which always seemed to double back on themselves. From one day to the next, Luke could rarely find his way to the same classroom twice, so it didn't matter that he was never sure which class he was supposed to be sitting in. He'd never be able to get to the right place anyhow. The teachers didn't seem to notice Luke or anyone else. They'd occasionally point at a boy and declare, "Two demerits," but they almost never called anyone by name. Luke wondered about sneaking up to his room during class time and reading the note from Jen's dad, since nobody cared where he was anyway. But the hall monitors guarded the stairs too. They guarded everything. So, Luke reflected gloomily, the note that could save him was doomed to turn to lint in his pocket. And Luke was doomed to endlessly wander the halls of Hendrix, unnoticed, unknowing, unknown. In bed at night, Luke took to having imaginary conversations with his family, Jen's dad. His part was all apologies. "I'm sorry, Mr. Talbot. You risked your life to get me a fake ID, and I wasn't worth it. I'm sorry, Jen. I'm not doing anything for the cause. I'm sorry, Mother. This was the hardest one of all. You wanted me to stay, but I said I had to go. I said I was going to make a difference in the world, but I can't. I wanted to make sure there was enough food for everyone in the world so third children could be legal again, but I can't even understand a word my teachers say, even the ones who are speaking my language. I'll never learn anything. I'll never be able to help anyone. I'm sorry, Mother. I should have never left you. I wish," but Luke wished for so much he couldn't go on. He was so busy longing for big, impossible changes, he never gave a thought to wanting anything smaller or more practical, like an open door. But that was what he got.